Ethan Walker slammed a signed contract down on his ex-boss's desk, quit his stable job on a Tuesday morning, and walked out with nothing but a toolbox and a daughter who still believed he could fix anything. That same afternoon, a moving truck pulled up next door. He didn't look twice. He had enough broken things of his own. But what happened next, between a throwaway joke, a whispered question, and one man who believed honesty was worth more than a suit, would shake everything. Both of them thought they knew about love worth and who actually deserves to stay. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. And if no one's told you yet today, subscribe. You're going to want to be here for this one. The morning Ethan Walker quit his job, he came home and made his daughter pancakes. Not because he was celebrating. Not because things were good. But because Mia was 8 years old, and she had a spelling test that day, and she always ate better when the pancakes had blueberries in them. And Ethan had decided a long time ago that whatever else fell apart in his life, his daughter's mornings would still feel like mornings. She sat at the kitchen table with her backpack on her back, because she always put her backpack on the moment she woke up, as if she was afraid school would leave without her. "Dad," she said, watching him flip a pancake. "You're home early." "Yep." "Did something happen?" He set the plate down in front of her. Blueberries arranged in the shape of a smiley face, because he still did that, because she still smiled when he did that, and he was going to hold on to that as long as humanly possible. "I made a decision," he said. Mia picked up her fork. "A good one or a bad one?" "Depends on who you ask." She considered this seriously, the way 8-year-olds consider everything, with complete unfiltered honesty. "Did you ask yourself?" "Yeah." "Then it's probably a good one." She stabbed a blueberry. "You're not good at bad decisions." Ethan sat down across from her and drank his coffee and didn't say anything else, because she was right, and because he didn't want to explain to an 8-year-old that he had just walked away from the only steady paycheck he'd had in 3 years, because his boss had asked him to sign off on work that wasn't done right, on a foundation that wasn't safe in a house where a family was going to move in, and trust that everything was solid. And Ethan Walker had never been able to put his name on something that wasn't true. His wife used to say that was his best quality. His wife used to say a lot of things. He missed her the way you miss the structure of a house when it's gone. Not dramatically. Not in a way that stops you. Just there were walls that used to hold things up, and now there aren't, and you keep reaching for them before you remember. 4 years. He was still reaching. He dropped Mia at school, came home and started calling contractors he knew, looking for independent work. He had skills. He had 16 years of experience in home repair and renovation. He had a reputation, a good one at least until this morning, and he had nothing to prove to anyone except that a man could walk away from dishonesty and still feed his kid. He was on his 3rd call when he heard it. The moving truck. He glanced out the front window. The old Hensley house. Next door, vacant for almost a year after old Dale Hensley passed and his kids couldn't agree on what to do with it, had finally sold. Ethan knew that. He'd watched the realtor's sign go up, then the sale pending sign, then nothing for 2 months, and then one morning the sign was gone, and he hadn't thought about it again. He thought about it now, because whoever had bought that house had arrived with stuff. Good stuff. Real stuff. The kind of furniture that came wrapped in moving blankets with its own team of professionals to carry it. Ethan watched from the window for exactly 4 seconds before he told himself to mind his business and went back to his phone. He had problems of his own. I didn't meet her until Thursday. 2 days after she moved in, he was replacing a section of rotted fence board along the property line between their houses. Work he'd been meaning to do for weeks when he heard the door open next door. He didn't look up. He heard footsteps on the porch. A pause. The soft sound of someone sitting down on porch stairs. And then, after a long moment of silence, "Is that noise going to be a regular thing?" He looked up then. She was sitting on the top step of the porch, wearing a linen blouse and slacks that probably cost more than his truck, holding a coffee mug in both hands. Watching him with dark brown eyes that were warm and direct and a little bit amused. She was beautiful. He noticed that the way you notice weather, not as a decision, just as a fact that arrives, and you register, and then you move on. "Depends," he said. "How much fence do you have?" She looked along the property line. How much fence is there? About 40 feet. She considered this. That's a lot of noise. I can do it in sections, he said. Give you some quiet in between. She almost smiled. Not quite. That's very considerate. I try. He went back to his work. Ethan Walker, I live here. I noticed. A pause. Charlotte Hayes. I know. She raised an eyebrow. You know, small town. You bought the Hensley house. Word travels. He pulled out a rotted board and set it aside. Interior designer, right? The one who did that renovation downtown last year, the old Carmichael building. Something shifted in her face. She straightened slightly. He had the sense he'd either said exactly the right thing or exactly the wrong thing, and he wasn't sure which. You know that building, she said. I did the subfloor work, before the designer came in. He glanced at her. Good bones in that building. Whoever designed around them knew what they were doing. She looked at him for a long moment. That was me, she said. I know, he said again. That's why I mentioned it. This time she did smile. It changed her whole face. Not in a dramatic way, in the way a room changes when someone opens a curtain. How long have you lived here? She asked. 9 years. You like it? My daughter does. She nodded slowly, as if that was an answer she understood in a way most people wouldn't. How old? 8. He drove a nail. Her name's Mia. She'll probably introduce herself before the week is out. Fair warning, she asks a lot of questions. I like questions. Good. Another nail. Because she's going to ask all of them. Charlotte Hayes had questions of her own. She just didn't ask them out loud. Not yet. What she did in those first 2 weeks was watch. Not in a suspicious way. In the way of someone who has learned to assess people quietly before deciding they're safe. She had learned that from experience. From years of walking into rooms where people saw the size of her before they saw anything else. Where the first calculation people made about her was based on how she looked, and everything she said and did after that was filtered through that first equation. She had learned to watch, to read, to know who was looking at her and seeing her, and who was looking at her and seeing something else entirely. Ethan Walker, she determined in those first 2 weeks, was looking at her. Not at her in the way she'd come to be wary of, not with that particular brand of appraising attention that always made her feel like a number being added up. Just at her, the way you look at a person you're actually listening to. It was disconcerting. She wasn't used to it. The fence repair took 3 days because Ethan found additional rot in 2 more sections and told her about it before he fixed it, which no one had ever done. Contractors, in her experience, either fix things without telling you or didn't fix things without telling you, and the idea of someone saying, here's the problem, here's what I'd suggest your decision, was strange enough to stop her cold. You don't have to ask me, she said. You're the one who knows about fences. It's your fence, he said simply. It borders your property too. Still your fence. He looked at her. You should know what's happening to your own property. Always. She thought about that later. Still thinking about it at midnight when she should have been sleeping. You should know what's happening to your own property. Always. She wondered if he knew how many people in her life had operated on exactly the opposite principle. The number of times someone had managed something of hers, her calendar, her finances, her reputation, and kept her deliberately in the dark. She thought about Victor. She stopped thinking about Victor. She went to bed. The day of the fence post, Mia introduced herself. Ethan had predicted this. He had not predicted that his daughter would walk up to Charlotte's front door, knock firmly 3 times, and when Charlotte answered, say, "Hi, I'm Mia Walker. I live next door. My dad says you're an interior designer. What's that?" Charlotte crouched down, actually crouched, lowered herself to Mia's eye level, which most adults didn't think to do, and said, "It means I help people figure out what their homes should look like." Mia considered this. Like decorating. More than decorating. More like figuring out how a space should feel. Mia's brow furrowed. Spaces don't have feelings. Are you sure? Mia was quiet for a moment. Our kitchen feels safe. she said finally, as if she was admitting something private. Because my dad makes breakfast there, so maybe. Charlotte was quiet for just a beat too long. Yeah, she said softly. Maybe. Mia seemed satisfied. Can I come in and see what you've done with the Hensley house? I used to go there when Mr. Hensley was alive. He gave me butterscotch candies. The house smelled like pipe smoke. Does it still smell like pipe smoke? It doesn't anymore. Is that better or worse? It depends, Charlotte said, on how you feel about pipe smoke. I feel neutral about it, Mia said solemnly. Charlotte laughed a real laugh surprised out of her and stepped back to let her in. Ethan found out 20 minutes later when he came looking for Mia and found her sitting at Charlotte's kitchen table with a glass of juice, asking questions about color theory. He stood in the doorway, looked at his daughter completely at home in a stranger's house, looked at Charlotte leaning on the counter across from her with her arms crossed, and a look on her face that he recognized as the specific expression of someone who wasn't used to being engaged like this, directly, genuinely, without agenda, and didn't quite know what to do with it. Mia. His voice was calm. What did we talk about? Not to knock on people's doors without permission. She didn't look up from the color wheel Charlotte had given her to look at. But I had permission. She let me in. You have to ask before you knock. That's not a rule. That's a suggestion. He looked at Charlotte. Charlotte was very carefully not smiling. I apologize, he said. Don't, she said. She was explaining to me how color theory relates to the emotional experience of architectural space, and honestly, she's not wrong. Mia looked up satisfied. I told you. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down. Just like that. Didn't overthink it. All right, he said. Show me what you've got. And that was how the three of them spent a Thursday afternoon, the handyman, the designer, and the 8-year-old who thought spaces had feelings, sitting at a kitchen table, arguing cheerfully about whether yellow was actually a happy color, or if that was just something people said. Ethan argued it was situational. Charlotte argued it was entirely about saturation. Mia argued they were both missing the point. She was probably right. The joke happened on a Friday night 3 weeks after Charlotte moved in. Ethan had come over to look at her back door. It was sticking. The frame had shifted slightly, probably seasonal, easily fixed, and he was down on one knee, examining the threshold when Charlotte came out of the kitchen with 2 glasses of iced tea, handed him one, and sat down on the back steps with the exasperated look of someone who had just gotten off a difficult phone call. Family, she said, as if the word explained everything. Yeah, he said, because it often did. My mother's birthday is in 6 weeks. She stared into her glass. There's a party. My aunt hosts it every year. It's a thing. And the last 3 years I've gone alone, and every year my aunt's husband spends the entire evening giving me career advice I didn't ask for, and my cousin brings her boyfriend and makes a production of how serious they are, and my mother worries about me loudly and publicly in that particular way that makes everything worse, and... She stopped, shook her head. Sorry, this isn't your problem. I've got 6 weeks before I have another steady contract, Ethan said, still looking at the door. I have time for other people's problems. She almost said something, thought better of it. He found the problem a small section of the door frame that had swollen with humidity and started working on it. After a while she said, Is there any version of this situation that improves without me showing up with a husband? He sat back on his heels and looked at her. That's a real question, he said. I know. He thought about it genuinely, the way he thought about problems. From the foundation up. In theory, you could arrive confidently single and decline to engage with anyone's commentary. But that only works if you're not also managing your mother's emotions in real time. Which I always am. Which you always are. She nodded slowly. So, no. There's no better version of this without a husband. He looked back at the door. Worked for another moment. Then he said, not looking at her, adjusting the plane in his hands. Well, if you ever need a husband for an hour, call me. He meant it as a throwaway. The kind of thing you say to lighten a moment. She knew he meant it as a throwaway. He knew she knew. And still. She was quiet for exactly long enough that he looked up. Charlotte Hayes was looking at him with those warm, dark eyes, and there was something in her expression that was very careful and very controlled, and underneath the control, something he hadn't expected. "Only an hour," she said. Her voice was quiet, not flirtatious, quieter than that, like the words got out before she could stop them. He held her gaze. He should have laughed. He did laugh eventually, a short surprise sound, and she laughed too, and they both looked away, and the moment dispersed the way moments do, into the general noise of evening. But he thought about it later. Lying awake in his quiet house, listening to Mia breathe through the baby monitor, he still kept on, even though she was 8 and didn't need it anymore, and he couldn't bring himself to turn off. He thought about those 2 words. Only an hour. Not as a joke, as a question. The next morning he brought her coffee. He didn't plan to. He made his coffee, made Mia's hot chocolate, and then he poured a 3rd mug. Charlotte took hers with 2 sugars he'd noticed without noticing. He was noticing, and he walked next door and knocked. She opened the door in a paint-stained sweater she'd clearly slept in, hair in a pile on top of her head, the kind of disarranged that people who are always composed find mortifying. She looked mortified for about half a second. Then she looked at the mug in his hand. Then she held out her hand for it. 2 sugars, he said. She didn't say, "How did you know?" She just took the mug, stepped back, and said, "The door's open." He came in. Mia, who missed nothing and said everything she noticed, told Charlotte 3 days later. "My dad started making coffee differently." Charlotte was helping her with a poster project for school. They'd gotten into the habit of this. Somehow the afternoon homework sessions at Charlotte's bigger table, and she looked up from the glue stick. "Oh yeah. He makes more now." Mia uncapped a marker. "He says it's because he was wasting too much before. But I don't think that's the real reason." Charlotte kept her eyes on the poster. "What do you think the real reason is?" Mia shrugged. "I think the real reason is he's making enough for you." Charlotte put down the scissors. "Mia, I don't mind," Mia said matter-of-factly. "In case you were wondering, I like you, and my dad is less quiet when you're around." She recapped the marker. "He's been very quiet for 4 years, so." Charlotte didn't say anything for a long moment. "Your dad is a good man," she said finally. Mia nodded. "I know." She looked up with those clear, serious eyes. "He doesn't know he is, though. That's the problem." Charlotte thought about that for a long time. She was used to men who knew exactly what they were worth and never let anyone forget it. Victor had walked into every room like the room had been waiting for him. He had a way of making everyone around him feel like supporting cast. Ethan walked into rooms like he was trying not to take up too much space, like he'd gotten it into his head somewhere along the way, that his size, not physical size but his weight in the world, his right to want things to be seen to matter to someone, was something he needed to apologize for. She recognized the feeling. She had lived in it for years. The 2 of them she thought were idiots in almost exactly the same way. She said something about it one evening when they were sitting on his back porch. Mia inside watching the movie, the summer night settling around them, the way summer nights do in Colorado, cool and clear and smelling faintly of pine. "Can I tell you something?" "Yeah." He was turning a piece of scrap wood in his hands, just working his thumb along the grain, the way he did when he was listening. "I think you're the least arrogant person I've ever met," she said. He looked at her. "That's a compliment." "It's a fact, and yes." She turned her glass in her hands. "I've spent my career surrounded by people who lead with what they've accomplished, who they know, what they own. And you just don't. You just exist, like a person. I am a person. You'd be surprised how rare that is in my world." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about your world." So she did. She told him about building her company from a small studio apartment and a second-hand laptop. About the years of pitching in rooms where she felt people look at her and make their first calculation and then spend the rest of the meeting revising upward, surprised by her despite themselves. About how exhausting it was to always have to prove yourself to someone who had already decided they had you figured out. About Victor. Not everything about Victor. Not yet. But enough. "How was charming," she said. "He knew what to say. He made me feel like he saw me, really saw me, not just what I looked like, not just the business, and that was—" She stopped, laughed slightly. "That was all I wanted. That's all I've ever wanted, honestly. To be seen." Ethan was quiet. "And he didn't," she said. "No. He saw what I'd built. He saw what I was worth financially. He saw a good story. Self-made woman built something from nothing, makes a good profile." She shook her head. "He didn't see me." Ethan set down the piece of wood. He looked at her for a long moment. "I see you," he said. "Not as a declaration, not as a move, just quietly. A statement of fact, the same way he talked about fence posts and door frames and everything else." She looked at him. Her throat was tight. "I know," she said. "That's what terrifies me." That night, after he'd walked her to her door and come back to his own quiet house, Ethan stood in his kitchen and looked around at the small space, the cluttered counter, the coffee pot with the third mug still in the cabinet, Mia's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, and felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But the shape of it. The outline. Like a room before the furniture arrives. He didn't let himself name it, but he also didn't push it away. 2 days later, Charlotte got a phone call that put ice in her stomach. She didn't tell Ethan about it right away. She sat with it for 3 days, moving through the information carefully. The way she moved through any complicated space, measuring, considering, looking for load-bearing walls. On the 3rd day, she knocked on his door at 7 in the morning, still in her coat, holding her phone like evidence. He opened the door, looked at her face, stepped back immediately. "Come in." She came in, sat at his kitchen table, put the phone down. He poured her coffee 2 sugars without asking, and sat across from her. "Victor's coming back," she said. He was very still. "He's contacted the board of my company," she said. "He's claiming I've lost professional judgment. He's using—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "He's using the fact that I moved here, that I've changed my patterns. He's building a case that I've become personally unstable, and he wants to call an emergency shareholders meeting." Ethan looked at her. "What does he actually want?" She looked back at him. "Control," she said. "Of everything I built." He said nothing. She said, "He used to be my business partner, before he was my fiancé. He knows where all the bodies are buried, every early mistake, every risky decision. He has documents he could misrepresent. He has people who'd speak for him because he's paid them enough, or he knows enough about them. And he's been building this case. For months probably, maybe longer." Her hands were flat on the table. Maybe the whole relationship was the case. Ethan was quiet for a long time. "What do you need?" he said. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in his face undid the iron control she'd been holding for 3 days. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not used to not knowing." "Yeah." He slid his coffee mug an inch across the table. Didn't say anything else, just left it there within reach. She put her hand around it, held on. Outside, a bird started up somewhere in the trees. Mia's alarm went off upstairs. The ordinary morning machinery of a small house in Colorado, grinding to life. And Charlotte Hayes sat at Ethan Walker's kitchen table and held his coffee mug with both hands and understood for the first time in a very long time that whatever happened next, she was not going to face it alone. Not if she didn't want to. She didn't want to. She was terrified of not wanting to. She was going to figure out how to want it anyway. The joke was supposed to be just a joke. 1 hour. A borrowed husband for a difficult family party. Neither of them had planned for this, for the coffee with 2 sugars for the afternoons at the kitchen table, for a child who said everything adults were afraid to say, for the specific quiet terror of being truly seen by someone and realizing you didn't want them to stop looking. Neither of them had planned for Victor to come back, and neither of them knew yet what Ethan Walker was capable of when someone threatened the people he loved. That part was coming. First, there was this morning, this mug, this table, this beginning. Victor Lang's name had been sitting in Charlotte's chest like a splinter for 3 days before she finally said it out loud to Ethan. And now that she had said it, now that it was out there on the kitchen table between them, alongside the coffee and the morning light, and Mia's footsteps overhead, it felt both better and worse. Better because silence is its own kind of poison. Worse because saying a thing out loud makes it real in a way that private fear never quite manages. Ethan sat across from her without moving, without reaching for his phone, without offering an opinion she hadn't asked for. He just sat there and let her talk, and she understood in that moment that this was the rarest thing a person could do for another person. Not fix it, not minimize it. Just stay in the room with the weight of it. "He's not doing this because he's jealous," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Victor Lang has never been jealous of anything in his life, because jealousy requires believing someone else has something worth wanting. Victor doesn't think that way." She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. "He's doing this because I left, and because leaving him meant I took something with me that he'd already decided was his." "The company," Ethan said. "The company, the reputation, the access." She looked at her coffee. "Me." Ethan was quiet. "He had a plan," she said. "I don't know exactly when the plan started. Maybe at the beginning, maybe somewhere in the middle. But I know now that everything that looked like love was actually inventory. He was cataloging what I had and figuring out how to position himself to take it. And the engagement. The engagement was the last step before the transfer." She said it flat. No emotion in the delivery because she had already spent it over 3 nights lying awake in the house she'd bought to put distance between herself and him, and what was left was just the clean, hard fact. He needed me to marry him to get the legal access he wanted. I figured it out 6 weeks before the wedding. Ethan looked at her. "6 weeks," he said. "I canceled it 12 days out." She met his eyes. "I told people it was mutual. It was not mutual. Victor was—" She stopped, chose her words. Victor was very unhappy, but he was smart enough to know that making a scene would damage his own position, so he didn't. He smiled. He called it a difficult but mutual decision. And then he spent the next 18 months quietly building the case he's now about to use against me. 18 months. 18 months. Ethan stood up and she tensed slightly, not afraid of him. Nothing like that, but braced for the thing she always expected the moment when a person decided this was too complicated, too much history, too much weight for someone else to carry. She was braced for him to say something managing and careful and exit the emotional room gracefully. He walked to the counter, refilled his coffee, came back and sat down. That was all. He came back. She had to look away for a second. "Tell me what he has," Ethan said. "Not what he's claiming, what he actually has," she breathed. "Some old financial records from the early years of the company, when I was making decisions without enough information. Nothing fraudulent, nothing actually wrong, but things that look aggressive out of context. A few client emails that could be characterized as unprofessional, if someone wanted to characterize them that way. And—" she hesitated. "And testimony from 2 former employees who left on bad terms, and who I suspect he's been keeping warm for exactly this moment. And his angle is that you've lost professional judgment. His angle is that my personal life has become erratic, that I moved impulsively, that I've formed—" she paused. "That I've formed questionable personal associations." Ethan looked at her steadily. "He means me. He means you." "Yes." The word landed in the space between them. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't get defensive. He just looked at her with those clear, calm eyes and said, "How long do we have before the shareholders' meeting?" She stared at him. "Ethan." "How long?" 5 weeks. Maybe 6. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was working through a structural problem, tracing the load from where the crack was back to where the damage actually started. "Then we have time." "We," she said. "Yes." He looked at her without apology. "We." She wanted to tell him he didn't have to. She wanted to tell him this wasn't his problem, that she appreciated the coffee and the steady presence and the way he listened, But she was not going to drag him into Victor Lang's orbit, which was a place people got damaged in. She wanted to say all of that. What she said instead was, "You're not afraid of him." "No. You should be. He has resources. He has lawyers. He has—" "I know exactly what he has," Ethan said. "People like Victor always have the same things. Money, connections, and the assumption that people like me aren't paying attention." He drank his coffee. "That last one's always been a mistake," he said. Upstairs, Mia's alarm went off a second time. There was the thump of small feet, the sound of a drawer being opened and closed with excessive force, the 8-year-old equivalent of waking up, and then her voice floating down the stairs. "Dad, I can't find my other shoe." Ethan stood. "1 minute," he called up. He looked at Charlotte. "Stay for breakfast." It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a command. It was just an offer put there the same way he put everything, simply without ornament. She stayed. She didn't examine why. She just stayed. That was the first morning that Charlotte Hayes ate breakfast at Ethan Walker's table with his daughter. And if any of the three of them noticed that it felt frighteningly natural, none of them said so out loud. Mia found her shoe. It was under the couch. She announced this with the satisfaction of someone who had solved a significant mystery. "Ate her eggs with focused efficiency?" asked Charlotte. 4 questions about color psychology before the school bus arrived and left in a rush of backpack and noise and the door banging behind her. And then it was quiet. The particular quiet of a house after a child leaves it. Ethan sat back down with his coffee. Charlotte looked at her plate. "She's going to be remarkable," Charlotte said. "She already is." He said it without sentimentality, a statement of fact. "She gets it from her mother." Charlotte looked at him. He was looking at his coffee mug, and his face was composed, but there was something around his eyes. Not grief, exactly. Not anymore, more like the permanent topography of a landscape that had been through weather. "What was she like?" Charlotte asked. "Your wife." Howe was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Honest," he said finally. "Embarrassingly honest. She couldn't lie about anything, not even the small social lies people tell to get through the day. She'd say things at dinner parties that made everyone go quiet, and then she'd look around confused about why everyone was quiet, and then she'd just continue." He almost smiled. "She thought I was too cautious. She said I treated every decision like I had to build it a foundation before I'd stand on it." "Was she right?" "Completely." He looked up. "She also said that was what made me safe to love." The sentence hung there. Charlotte picked up her fork, put it down. "I don't think I've ever made anyone feel safe," she said. "I think I've made people feel impressed, occasionally intimidated. I've been called ambitious and brilliant and a force of nature." She paused. "Nobody's ever called me safe." "Safe doesn't mean what people think it means," Ethan said. "It doesn't mean soft. It means—" He thought about it. "It means someone's not going to drop you, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs them something." Charlotte was very still. "Victor dropped you," he said. "Or he was always planning to. But the weight of what you were carrying, the history, the success, the whole real specific complicated person you are, he was never going to hold that. Not really." She realized her jaw was tight. She made herself unclench it. "You're very perceptive for a man who fixes fences for a living," she said. "I fix a lot of things," he said. "You have to understand how things work to fix them. That includes people." She looked at him. He looked back unhurried. "You're not going to let this go," she said. "The Victor thing." "No. You understand that getting involved means he's going to come after you directly." "He's going to come after me directly either way," Ethan said. "I'm already the storyline. I might as well be useful to it." She shook her head slowly. "Why?" He considered the question seriously. Not a performance of consideration, actual thought, sitting behind his eyes. "Because someone should have been useful to it a long time ago," he said. "And wasn't." Charlotte looked away. The window, the ordinary yard beyond it, the fence he'd fixed. She thought about the very specific kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who will always, in the final calculation, choose their own comfort over your protection. She thought about how long she had been that kind of alone. She thought about the mug he'd put within her reach that morning. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. That was all. That was enough. They cleared the breakfast dishes together, and they did not talk about Victor Lang again that morning, and if both of them were quietly terrified in their own particular ways, they managed to be terrified in the same room without letting it collapse anything. That felt like something. That felt like a lot. 3 days later, a man named Dale Pritchard, Ethan's oldest client, 72 years old, retired, schoolteacher, had trusted Ethan with every repair job on his house for 8 years, called to cancel a contract. He was apologetic about it. That was the thing that told Ethan everything he needed to know. Dale Pritchard was not a man who apologized for decisions he believed in. "Something come up?" Ethan asked. A pause. Too long. "Just some things I heard," Dale said. "Nothing I'm sure about. I just think for now it might be better to find someone else." "Things you heard," Ethan repeated. "Ethan, I'm sorry, I really am." He hung up. Ethan stood in his kitchen and held the phone and understood with cold, clear certainty that Victor Lang had not waited for the shareholders' meeting to begin. Victor was already working, already planting things, already doing what people with resources and no scruples do when they've decided to make an example of someone. He picked up his phone again and called Charlotte. She answered on the first ring. "I know," she said. "I just got a call from my bank. Victor's put in a formal request to freeze 2 of my business accounts pending the meeting. He doesn't have grounds for it. My lawyers are already responding, but it's going to create delays and he knows it. He's not waiting. He never waits when he thinks he's winning." Her voice was controlled, impressively controlled. "He's trying to isolate me, cut off resources, cut off professional relationships, make it look from the outside like I'm already failing before the vote happens. What do you need right now?" "I need my lawyers to move faster than they're moving. I need—" She stopped. "Charlotte, I need to not feel like I'm 8 years old hiding in a bathroom at school while people say things about me in the hallway." She said it in a rush, like she'd been holding it and it escaped. Then, "I can't believe I just said that." "I can," he said. "Because that's what he's making you feel. That's deliberate. That's the point." Silence. "You're good at this," she said quietly. "Understanding how things work. I have some experience with being underestimated," he said. "You learn to watch people carefully when you know they're not watching you back." Another pause. Then, "Come over tonight. Bring Mia. I'll make dinner." "You don't have to." "I want to cook," she said. "I want to stand in my kitchen and make food, and have people in my house, and feel like a person instead of a target. Can you just let me do that?" He understood that. "What time?" he said. 6. "We'll be there." He hung up. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he went to work, because the bills didn't pause for personal crises, and he had a kitchen renovation 3 miles away that needed him. He drove to the job. He worked. He measured twice. He cut once. He did the work the way he always did the work, carefully, correctly, with attention to what was underneath, not just what showed. He thought about Victor Lang. He thought about the word invisible. There was a thing that happened in his line of work. He had seen it dozens of times. A wealthy homeowner brings in a fancy contractor for the visible work. The tile, the cabinetry, the fixtures, and the fancy contractor hires out the invisible work, the wiring, the plumbing, the structure to men like Ethan. Men in work boots with dirty hands who moved through the expensive house quietly and got ignored at the fancy contractor's barbecue. And what those homeowners never understood, what the fancy contractor sometimes forgot, was that the man doing the invisible work knew everything. He was inside the walls. He heard what people said when they thought no one important was listening. He saw what was real and what was decorated. Victor Lang had already underestimated Ethan once. Ethan was beginning to think that might be useful. Charlotte's dinner was pasta, with a sauce that had clearly been cooking most of the afternoon. She'd come home from her lawyers at noon and gone straight to the kitchen, which was apparently how she handled stress, which Ethan filed away and appreciated without comment. Mia walked in the front door, looked at the kitchen, breathed in and said, It smells like the restaurant my dad took me to for my birthday. The good one. Sit down, Charlotte said. Both of you. It's almost ready. Mia sat down. She looked around the kitchen at the good knives, the good pans, the copper pot on the stove that had clearly been used today, and not just for decoration. You actually cook, she said, sounding surprised. Did you think I didn't? Most rich people don't, in my experience. Charlotte glanced at Ethan over Mia's head. He raised his hand slightly. She says what she observes. I've given up editing it. My last nanny didn't cook. Mia continued, apparently feeling this was useful data. She made those frozen things where you poke holes in the top. They were fine, but fine isn't... She gestured at the pot. This. Your last nanny. Charlotte set pasta in front of her. Before Grandma started coming on the days Dad works far away. Before that there was a nanny. She was nice. She did not cook. How long ago was that? When I was 6. Mia picked up her fork. After Mom died, Dad tried a nanny, but she quit because I asked too many questions. The nanny after that quit because I corrected her spelling. The one after that. Mia. I'm just giving context. Context provided. Charlotte sat down with a look of carefully suppressed amusement. How many nannies were there? Ethan looked at the ceiling. 4, Mia said. 4, Charlotte repeated. They were all fine, Mia said charitably. Just not good at the hard parts. Charlotte looked at Ethan. The hard parts. She means the questions, he said. And the correcting. And the talking at length about things people aren't expecting her to talk about. Mia looked between them. I'm sitting right here. We know, Charlotte said. And you're doing it beautifully. Mia grinned, went back to her pasta. Under the table, without looking at him, Charlotte's hand found Ethan's wrist. Just briefly, just a touch, gone almost as soon as it arrived. He didn't say anything, neither did she. But something settled. The kind of thing that settles when a person stops bracing, after dinner. Mia fell asleep on Charlotte's couch. Something that happened gradually, the way falling asleep always does with 8-year-olds' resistance, then surrender, and Ethan covered her with a blanket while Charlotte washed the dishes. He came into the kitchen. You didn't have to do that, he said. Wash dishes. Make this, all of this. He gestured vaguely at the kitchen, but they both knew he didn't mean the kitchen. You're dealing with enough. Charlotte dried her hands on a dish towel. She looked at him directly. Do you know what I do when I'm scared? Cook, apparently. Work, she said. I work. I have since I was 22 years old, and I was sitting in a studio apartment with $40 and a second-hand laptop and a list of contacts who hadn't returned my calls yet. I make things. I build things. I feed people. She folded the towel. Because the act of making something is the opposite of being dismantled. You understand that? He did understand it. He understood it in his bones. He's not going to win, he said. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I know that people who build real things on real foundations last longer than people who only understand the surface. She looked at him for a long moment. Victor thinks you're irrelevant, she said. That's not an insult, I'm telling you, because you should know what he thinks. He mentioned you to my lawyer. He described you as... She paused. He called you a distraction. A local handyman I'd attached myself to as some kind of rebellion. Ethan was quiet. That's good, he said. She stared at him. That's good. It means he's not watching me, he said. It means he's so certain I'm nothing that he's not paying attention to what I'm doing. She stared at him. What are you doing? She said slowly. He looked at her. I took a repair job yesterday, he said. Small job. Basic stuff. Residential. Okay. The house belongs to a man named Gerald Foss, he said. Gerald Foss is Victor Lang's personal accountant. Charlotte went very still. You looked into Victor's people, she said. I do repair work for a lot of people in this area, he said. I know who lives where. I know who needs what. And Gerald Foss has been asking around for someone to look at his basement drainage for 3 months. He met her eyes. I called him this morning. She looked at him. really looked at him in a way that rearranged something. "You're not just a handyman," she said. "I'm exactly a handyman," he said. "That's the entire point." She pressed her hand flat to the counter. "Ethan, if Victor finds out you're—" Victor Lang walks through the world assuming that men who work with their hands aren't paying attention, Ethan said. "In my experience, we're the ones who pay the most attention, because we're always in the rooms where things actually happen. The maintenance rooms, the basements, the back hallways." He looked at her steadily. "We hear things, we see things, because nobody's performing for us." Charlotte looked at him. Something moved across her face, a sequence of things actually. Recognition, calculation. Something that might have been awe if she'd been the kind of person who allowed herself to be awed. Then, "Be careful." "I'm always careful." "Be more careful than always," she said. "Because Victor Lang does not lose gracefully. And when he figures out you're a threat, and he's going to try to take something from you. Then I'll have to find what I need before he figures it out," Ethan said. They looked at each other across the clean kitchen counter. Mia, asleep in the next room, the night pressing quiet against the windows, the whole complicated machinery of what was coming, grinding slowly in the background. Charlotte reached out. She put her hand on his. Not brief this time. Not a glancing touch that could be explained away. She put her hand on his, and she left it there. "Why are you doing this?" she said, quiet, real, honestly. He looked at her hand on his. "Because the right thing doesn't stop being the right thing because it's inconvenient," he said. "Because you deserved better than what he planned for you. Because—" He stopped. She waited. "Because when you said you were scared," he said slowly, "I didn't feel pity. I felt like I recognized something. Like I knew exactly what that fear felt like." He turned his hand over. Let her hand rest in his palm. "And I know what it feels like when nobody's in your corner. And I didn't want you to feel that." Charlotte Hayes, who had built a company from nothing, who had walked into rooms full of people waiting for her to fail and proved them wrong without flinching, who had survived Victor Lang and the end of what she'd thought was love and a move across the state to start over. Charlotte Hayes looked at Ethan Walker in his clean kitchen and felt in the region of her chest the particular crack of something that has been held rigidly for too long finally giving way. "I don't want you to get hurt," she said. "I know. I mean it. I know you do." He didn't let go of her hand. "That's new for you, isn't it? Actually meaning it." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is." Outside, a car passed. In, Mia breathed softly on the couch. The kitchen was warm. The pasta pot sat clean and empty on the stove. And Victor Lang, in whatever hotel room or office or engineered circumstance he was currently occupying, had no idea that the man he had called a distraction was sitting in his target's kitchen, holding her hand and thinking very carefully about basements and drainage and what arrogant people reveal when they believe no one important is listening. He had made the oldest mistake in the book. He had looked at a man with dirty hands and decided nothing there was worth fearing. He would learn. It was only a matter of time. The call from Gerald Foss came on a Wednesday morning, and it was not the call Ethan had been expecting. He had been expecting a call about drainage, about a basement, about the slow, patient work of listening to a man talk while he fixed what needed fixing, the way he'd done 100 times before in 100 different houses. He'd been expecting the job to take 3, maybe 4 visits. Enough time to understand the shape of Victor Lang's world from the inside out. What he got instead was Gerald Foss saying, "I have to cancel. I'm sorry, something's come up." The same apologetic tone Dale Pritchard had used. The same pause that was one beat too long. Ethan stood in his driveway with the phone against his ear and understood immediately. Victor knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to close the door before Ethan could get his foot in it. "Understood," Ethan said. Calm. No pressure. "Let me know if you change your mind." He hung up. He stood there for a moment in the cold morning air. Then he called Charlotte. She picked up on the second ring, and before he could say anything, she said, "He called you, didn't he? Foss. Canceled this morning. Victor found out you'd made contact." Her voice was tight and controlled. My lawyer thinks there's someone in my own office feeding him information. Someone who knows my movements, my conversations, who I've been talking to. Ethan was quiet for a beat. Someone on your staff. It's the only explanation for how quickly he's moving. He heard her exhale. I have 7 people in my firm. I've worked with most of them for years. The idea that one of them is... She stopped. Don't assume yet, he said. Not until you know. I know enough. You know that he's getting information somehow. That's not the same as knowing who. He kept his voice steady. If you start accusing people without proof, you give him exactly the chaos he wants. A pause. You're right, she said. She didn't say it easily. It cost her something. I hate that you're right. I know. What do we do? Ethan looked at the fence he'd repaired, thought about foundations, thought about the difference between where damage was visible and where damage actually started. We let him think he's winning, he said. We stop moving toward him and we let him come to us. Arrogant people move faster when they think they've got control. They start making mistakes. Another pause, longer. You think like a builder, she said quietly. Buildings don't lie, he said. Neither does arrogance. That afternoon, Mia came home from school with a sealed expression that Ethan recognized as the face she made when she was holding something painful and hadn't decided what to do with it yet. He let her be for 20 minutes. He made hot chocolate. He put it on the table without comment, and he sat across from her and waited, because that was the only way with Mia. You waited. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Jalen said something today, she said. What did Jalen say? He said his dad saw something online, about you, about Charlotte. She looked at the mug. He said you were in it for her money, and that Charlotte was... She stopped. Tell me exactly. He said Charlotte was stupid for not seeing it. Mia's jaw was tight. He said a lot of stuff. The other kids heard. Some of them laughed. Ethan kept his face composed. What did you do? I told him he was repeating things he didn't understand, and that made him just as responsible for them as whoever said them first. He looked at his daughter. I also told him his sources were unreliable, she added. Mrs. Patterson made me apologize for that part. I don't think I should have had to. What did Mrs. Patterson say about the rest of it? She didn't hear the rest of it. Mia finally looked up. Dad, are people saying bad things about you? Ethan took a breath. He could soften this. He could package it in the cotton wool that adults wrap difficult things in when they're handing them to children. He could say it's complicated, it's grown-up stuff, don't worry about it. Mia was 8 years, and she was smarter than most adults he'd met, and she already knew something was wrong. The only thing he'd accomplish by softening it was teaching her that he'd lie to her when things got hard. Some people are saying things that aren't true, he said. About me and Charlotte. Someone is spreading those things on purpose because he wants to hurt Charlotte's reputation. Mia was quiet. The same someone who was going to be her husband, she said. It wasn't a question. Charlotte had mentioned Victor once briefly, and Mia had filed it the way she filed everything. Yes. And now he's putting you in it. Yes. Mia drank her hot chocolate, thinking hard. What are we going to do? She said. We're going to be patient. We're going to let him make mistakes, and we're going to make sure the truth is somewhere he can't reach it. Mia considered this. That sounds like a long plan. Good plans usually are. She nodded. Okay. She picked up her backpack. Homework. The ordinary machinery of her life clicking back into place. She stopped at the doorway. Dad? Yeah. I told Jalen something else. What? I told him that people who fix things for a living understand structures better than people who just buy them. She looked at him evenly. And that broken things are always more interesting than things that were never tested. Ethan stared at her. Where did you get that? Charlotte said it. She was talking about old buildings, but I thought it applied. She went upstairs. He sat at the table for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and texted Charlotte. Your philosophy is influencing my 8-year-old's conflict resolution strategy. Thought you should know. 3 seconds later. Is that good or bad? He texted back. She shut down a kid twice her size using structural metaphors. So good. Definitely good. The reply came with a laughing emoji, and then after a pause, I needed that today. Thank you. He put the phone down. The warmth of it. That small, uncomplicated exchange. The easiness of it. The way she'd said, I needed that today, without armoring it with irony or qualification, sat in his chest for the rest of the evening. He realized, in serious trouble. Not the Victor kind. That kind he could handle. He'd been handling impossible loads in impossible conditions his entire career. The other kind of trouble. The kind where a person starts to matter. Where you start building things in your head. Futures mornings, ordinary Tuesdays that you have no business building yet. He'd done this once before in his life. Built everything around one person. Loved completely and without reservation and with his whole self. And then she was gone, and the structure of everything he'd built around her had to be completely redesigned from the inside, with nothing but stubbornness and a daughter who needed breakfast and a series of days that kept arriving, whether he was ready for them or not. I was not going to be stupid enough to do that again. He told himself that. He told himself that clearly and firmly. He mostly believed it. The next morning, Victor Lang walked into a coffee shop 2 miles from Charlotte's house, and Ethan was there. Not because he'd planned it. Not exactly. He'd been doing a plumbing job 3 blocks away, a legitimate job. Nothing strategic, a burst pipe under a kitchen sink, and he'd stopped for coffee on the way back to his truck, and he'd walked in, and there at a corner table with a laptop and a coffee that probably cost $12 was Victor Lang. Ethan knew him from the photographs Charlotte had shown him. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of physical presence that came from years of curating how you appeared. Broad shoulders and a good suit, and the easy comfort of someone who had never in his life walked into a room expecting not to be served. He was on a call. Speaking quietly, leaning forward, his hand moving in the focused, precise gestures of a man making a point he was confident about. Ethan ordered his coffee. He sat 2 tables away. He didn't look at Victor. He didn't need to look at Victor. He was a man in work clothes with dirt on his boots sitting in a coffee shop. He was background. He was furniture. He was exactly the kind of person that a man like Victor Lang's eyes slide past without registering. He listened. Victor was talking to someone about a document, about timing, about a window before she can respond. He mentioned a name, not Charlotte's name, a name Ethan didn't recognize, and a word that sounded like leverage. He mentioned an account number, partially the last 4 digits, and then stopped himself and said they'd talk later. He hung up. He looked at his laptop. He never looked at Ethan. Ethan drank his coffee. I thought there's something in those accounts. Something Victor's been moving. Charlotte thought his attack was about her reputation, about the shareholders, about the relationship being spun as a liability. And some of it was. But underneath that, underneath the professional assault, there was something financial. Something Victor needed the noise to cover. He thought about Charlotte saying maybe the whole relationship was the case. I thought about what kind of man plans 18 months in advance. A man who is running out of time somewhere else. A man who needs what Charlotte has because something else is going wrong. He finished his coffee. He didn't rush. He stood disposed of his cup and walked out past Victor Lang's table close enough that if Victor had been paying attention, he would have seen a man in a worn jacket with calluses on his hands and grease faint under his thumbnail. Victor didn't look up. Ethan walked out into the cold morning and called Charlotte from the parking lot. "He's here," he said. "In town, at the Ridgeline Coffee on 7th. A beat of silence. "That's 4 blocks from my office." "I know." "He's been in my city for how long?" Her voice was controlled, but only just. "I don't know. I heard something on his call. Something about an account and a window and leverage. Charlotte." He lowered his voice. "I don't think the shareholders' meeting is the main event. I think it's cover." The silence that followed was different from the previous one. Denser. "He's hiding something in the company accounts," she said. Not a question. "I think he's already moved something. I think he moved it before you ended the engagement or right after, and the meeting is supposed to happen fast enough that there's confusion about what belongs to who. Another silence. "My God," she said quietly. "He didn't just want the company. He's already taken something from it." "I could be wrong." "You're not wrong." He heard her moving a door footsteps. "I need to call my forensic accountant. I need to—" "Ethan, I need to look at 18 months of account activity, going back to when we were still engaged, and I need to do it before he knows I'm looking." "Do that," he said. "Today." "Today," she agreed. "And Charlotte—" He stopped. "What?" "Act normal," he said. "Whatever you find. Act like you don't know anything. Because if he sees you reacting, he'll move faster." She was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me to be calm when I find out exactly how badly I've been robbed." "I'm asking you to be strategic," he said. "There's a difference." A beat. "I know there's a difference." Another beat. "I hate that there's a difference." "I know." He heard her take a slow, controlled breath. "Okay, I'll call Marcus. He's the best forensic accountant I know, and he owes me a favor." "Good." "And Ethan." "Yeah. Be careful going back to your truck. Don't let him see you come from this direction." He was already walking the other way. "Already on it," he said. 2 days passed. They were the worst 2 days Ethan could remember in a long time, and he had a fairly comprehensive library of bad days to reference. The specific badness of these 2 days was not the dramatic kind, not crisis, not confrontation, not even fear exactly. It was the low grinding pressure of waiting, of knowing that somewhere in the invisible world of digital accounts and legal documents and back-channel conversations, something was happening that he couldn't fix with his hands. He fixed other things. He went to work. He picked Mia up. He cooked dinner. He did all the ordinary things that kept life running while the extraordinary thing ground on underneath. Mia noticed. She always noticed. "You're doing that thing," she told him on the second evening. "What thing?" "The thing where you measure stuff twice even when you already measured it. The worried thing." "I measure everything twice. That's just how you build something that lasts." "Dad." She gave him the look, the one that was too old for her face. "You can just say you're worried." He put down his coffee. "I'm worried," he said. She nodded. "About Charlotte." "About the situation." "Same thing," she said with the blunt precision that Charlotte apparently found charming, and Ethan found both wonderful and occasionally exhausting. He didn't deny it. That was its own kind of admission. On the second evening, Charlotte called at 9 o'clock. Mia was asleep. The house was quiet. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and listened to Charlotte's voice, which was not controlled anymore, which had been controlled all week and was finally in the privacy of a 9 o'clock phone call not. "Marcus found it," she said. Ethan held the phone tighter. 14 months ago, Victor shifted a series of client payments through a subsidiary account that he'd restructured with himself as secondary administrator. The amounts were small enough individually that they didn't flag automatically. But in total, she stopped. "How much?" "A little over $300,000. Her voice was steady and shaking at the same time, which was a thing Ethan hadn't known a voice could do. He filtered it out in small amounts over 14 months. It was done carefully, done by someone who knew exactly what the audit thresholds were. "He's been embezzling from your company for over a year." She exhaled. "While we were engaged. While he was telling me he believed in what I'd built. While he was—" She stopped again. "While he was saying he loved me." Ethan was quiet. There was nothing to say to that. Not really. Not anything that would help in this particular moment. What he said was, Marcus documented all of it. Everything. Time-stamped. Forensically clean. "Your lawyers need this tonight. They have it. I sent it the moment Marcus confirmed." She took a breath. "The police will be involved by morning. Victor's attorney is going to be very surprised." "Good." "It's not enough, though," she said. "Not by itself. He's going to say I fabricated it. He's going to say I did this to discredit him before the meeting. We need something that proves the pattern. Something that shows intent. Something from outside my company." Ethan thought about a man in a coffee shop leaning forward, talking about an account number and a window and leverage. He thought about Gerald Foss. He thought about all the things that arrogant people say when they believe nobody important is listening. "I might have something," he said. She went very still on the other end of the line. "What?" "I need to make a phone call first. Give me until tomorrow morning." "Ethan, trust me." A pause. A long one. "That is a very small number of words to be putting a very large amount of weight on," she said. "I know. Okay," she said. He stayed on the phone with her for another 20 minutes. Not talking about Victor, not talking about the money, just talking. She told him about a project she'd been working on before. All of this started a renovation for a historic building in Denver, the kind of project she'd wanted for years, the kind that required exactly the sensibility she'd spent her whole career developing. He told her about a house he'd worked on once early in his career, a Victorian in bad shape that he'd spent 6 months restoring almost entirely alone. He told her how it felt when the structure was finally sound again. When the thing that looked broken turned out to only need someone willing to do the slow, unglamorous work of actually understanding it. She was quiet when he finished. "That's not actually about the house, is it?" she said. "No," he said. "Not entirely." A beat. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Charlotte." He sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time after he hung up. Then he picked up the phone again and made a different call. Not to a lawyer, not to a contractor, to a man named Roy Castillo, who had done electrical work for Victor Lang's personal residence 18 months ago, and who had mentioned once at a job site casually, the way people mention things when they're talking to someone they don't consider a threat, that the man who'd hired him had very particular ideas about what got documented and what didn't. Roy picked up on the third ring. "I know it's late," Ethan said. "I need to ask you something." Roy was quiet for a moment. "This about that Lang guy." "Yeah." Another moment. "You're not the first person to ask," Roy said slowly. "A cop came by, about 6 months ago, asking about a property transaction." Ethan sat up straighter. "What did you tell him?" "I told him what I knew, which wasn't much, but I kept something." Roy paused. "I kept the original contracts, the ones he asked me to destroy after the job was done. Told me they were duplicates and he didn't want the filing confusion." A beat. "I've been in this business long enough to know you don't destroy original contracts for filing confusion." Ethan's chest tightened. "Roy, do you still have them?" "In my truck," Roy said. "Same place they've been for 18 months. Ethan closed his eyes. "I need to connect you with Charlotte Hayes's legal team," he said. "Tonight, if possible. This is going to be a problem for me." "I know. But the man who told you to destroy those contracts is building a case against an innocent person right now, and without what you have, she might not be able to stop him." A long silence. "She the woman in the news," Roy said. "The designer." "She built her company herself," Ethan said. "From nothing. He was going to take it." Another silence. "Text me the lawyer's number," Roy said. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Thank you, Roy." "Don't thank me. Just make sure it's worth something." He hung up. Ethan sat in the kitchen for another moment. The clock on the wall said 11:47. The house was quiet. Somewhere down the street, someone's dog was barking at something that wasn't there. I thought about Victor Lang in his corner coffee shop, laptop open. $12 coffee, the easy comfort of someone who has never once believed someone like Ethan Walker was worth watching. He thought about what his wife used to say. The best foundation, she used to say, is the one you built when nobody was watching you build it. She had been talking about their marriage. It applied to other things too. He texted Roy the number. Then he went to bed because Mia had a field trip in the morning and she'd need her lunch packed and her permission slip signed. And the world didn't stop requiring breakfast and permission slips just because a man was doing something that mattered. That was the thing about real life. It didn't pause for the significant moments. You had to hold both things at once. He set his alarm. He slept. He dreamed about a house with good bones being opened up to the light. The morning started like every other morning. Mia cereal backpack on by 650 permission slip found under a library book on the counter. The school bus. The wave from the window that he always waited for, that she always gave the small ritual of it. Then his phone rang. Charlotte. He picked up. He moved up the meeting, she said. Her voice was clipped and precise, and underneath it was something close to panic-controlled, but barely. The shareholders' meeting. He's called an emergency session, day after tomorrow. He's claiming there's an urgent financial matter requiring immediate oversight. A beat. He knows I found something. Someone told him. The information source in her office. Still active. Ethan's mind moved fast. Your lawyers. Working through the night. But day after tomorrow is not enough time to get everything properly filed. The documents from Roy, that's going to take time to process, to authenticate. His lawyers will object. They'll claim it's last-minute, inadmissible. Charlotte. And I don't have enough board members who are genuinely neutral. 2 of them have existing relationships with Victor that I can't. Charlotte. His voice was firm and quiet. She stopped. Take a breath, he said. She did. He heard it. He's panicking, Ethan said. That's what this is. He doesn't move up the timeline because he's winning. He moves it up because something scared him. Silence on her end. Roy's documents scared him, Ethan said. He knows something got out. He doesn't know exactly what or exactly from where, but he knows the ground shifted and he's trying to move faster than the shift. Another silence. Which means, Charlotte said slowly, that what we have is actually worse for him than I thought. Yes. Which means he's already losing. He's been losing since he let me into Gerald Foss's neighborhood, Ethan said. He just doesn't know it yet. The silence this time was different. Warmer. Steadier. Ethan, she said. Yeah. I need you to come over. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He was there in 8. She opened the door before he knocked, which meant she'd been watching for him, and she looked like someone who had been awake all night and had stopped trying to look like she hadn't. Hair loose cardigan over pajama pants, the kind of undone that Charlotte Hayes in his experience found difficult to allow. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then she did something he hadn't expected. She stepped forward and put her arms around him, and she held on, and she pressed her face into his shoulder, and she didn't say anything. He put his arms around her. He didn't say anything either. They stood there in the open doorway for a long moment. 2 people who had both spent years believing they had to handle the unbearable things alone, learning in real time that they didn't. That was the thing about trust. You couldn't build it in advance. You could only find it by falling forward and discovering someone was there. Charlotte fell forward. Ethan was there. She pulled back finally, and she straightened, and the control came back to her face. But it was a different kind of control than the kind she'd been wearing all week. Not a wall. More like a spine. Come in, she said. I'll make coffee. We have a meeting to survive. He came in. She made the coffee. And 2 people who had both been told in different ways, and by different people, and for different reasons, that they were not quite enough, that they were too simple, too big, too damaged, too ordinary, too much, sat down together at a kitchen table and started making a plan. Victor Lang had no idea what was coming for him. The plan they built at Charlotte's kitchen table that morning was not elegant. It was not the kind of plan that looks good on paper or sounds impressive when you describe it to someone later. It was the kind of plan that Ethan built the way he built everything from the foundation up, starting with what was real, what was solid, what could actually hold weight when pressure was applied. Charlotte's lawyers had Roy's documents. They were being processed, authenticated, cross-referenced against 14 months of forensic accounting that Marcus had spent 48 sleepless hours compiling. The picture it painted was not ambiguous. Victor Lang had moved $312,000 through a restructured subsidiary account with the patience and precision of someone who had done this before, or had paid someone who had done this before. And the paper trail, the one he had asked Roy to destroy, was the thread that connected every transaction back to his personal authorization. The problem was time. The shareholders' meeting was in 36 hours. Charlotte's legal team could request a postponement, but Victor's lawyers would contest it, And the judge assigned to the emergency filing was not someone Charlotte's lead attorney, a sharp woman named Diane Reyes, had a warm history with. Best case. Diane told them both by speakerphone at 7 that morning. We get a 72-hour extension. Worst case, the meeting proceeds as scheduled, and we submit everything as a formal counterfiling the same day, which is messier, but still viable. What's the risk in messy? Charlotte asked. The risk in messy, Diane said, is that Victor gets to make his presentation first. He gets to frame the story. And even if we refute everything completely, 2 hours later, first impressions leave marks. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He looked back. He's going to stand up in front of your board, Ethan said, and present me as the evidence that your judgment is compromised. A local handyman. The implication being that a successful woman who forms a genuine attachment to a man without money or status must be operating emotionally rather than professionally. Yes, Charlotte said flatly. And the board members who already have relationships with Victor are going to be nodding before he finishes the sentence. 2 of them, Marcus Hale and Diane Cho. Both have worked with Victor on separate ventures. I don't think they're corrupt. I think they're just familiar with him, comfortable. They know what they're getting with Victor. I'm the variable. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, Diane, what happens if someone directly connected to the financial irregularities is present at the meeting and willing to speak? A pause on the line. What do you mean by directly connected? Diane asked carefully. Roy Castillo has the original contracts. That establishes the paper. But I spent 20 minutes in a coffee shop 2 days ago, close enough to hear Victor talking about account timing and a leverage window to someone on the phone. That conversation, if I'm willing to testify to it under oath, establishes intent. It places him in this town discussing the financial mechanics 2 days before he moved up the meeting. Diane was quiet for a beat that was 1 beat longer than her usual pauses. You heard him say this. I heard enough. I can be specific about what I heard. Another pause. And you're willing to put that in a sworn statement? I'm willing to do more than that, Ethan said. I'm willing to walk into that meeting room. Charlotte stared at him. Ethan? If he wants to use me as evidence of poor judgment, Ethan said, let him do it to my face. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when a room recalibrates around a new variable. Diane spoke first. That is either a very good idea or a very bad one. Which do you think it is? Ethan asked. A beat. I think it's the kind of idea that only works if the person executing it is genuinely unrattleable, Diane said. Victor Lang is professionally skilled at making people feel small in public. If he gets you on the defensive, it confirms his narrative. He won't get me on the defensive, Ethan said. How can you be sure? Because I've been in rooms full of people who thought I didn't matter my whole life, Ethan said. I know how to breathe in those rooms. Another pause. Longer. Charlotte, Diane said, this is your call. Charlotte looked at Ethan. Not the calculating look of someone assessing a strategy. The real look. The one that went past the plan and looked at the person. What are you actually doing? She said quietly. The same thing I always do, he said. Finding out where the damage really started so I can fix the right thing. Charlotte held his gaze for 3 seconds that felt longer. Diane, she said. Get him credentialed for the meeting. There was a brief, sharp exhale on the line that might have been a laugh. Done, Diane said. I need a sworn statement from both of you by end of day. And Ethan wear something other than the work jacket. He looked at his jacket. I'll figure something out, he said. The next 30 hours moved in the stop-start rhythm of a crisis being managed from multiple directions at once. Diane's team filed for postponement. Victor's team contested it. The judge, as predicted, ruled against the extension. The meeting would proceed as scheduled the following morning at 9 o'clock in the third-floor conference room of Charlotte's own building, which felt like a particular kind of indignity. The man trying to take everything she'd built was going to do it in the building she'd built it from. At noon, Charlotte's office. Manager, a young woman named Priya, who had been with the firm for 3 years, knocked on Charlotte's closed office door, came in and closed it behind her with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been rehearsing this moment. I need to tell you something, Priya said. Charlotte looked at her. Priya's face was white. I think the person who told Victor about Ethan's visit to Gerald Foss. I think it was me. Not intentionally. She stopped. Started again. Victor's assistant called me 2 weeks ago. She said she was coordinating information for the board meeting and that it was standard procedure for an audit. She asked about your schedule, your recent contacts. I thought it was coming from your board. I thought you'd authorized it. Charlotte was very still. I didn't know, Priya said. I swear to you I didn't know. The moment I realized when everything started moving so fast, I went back and looked at who that assistant actually was. And she's not a board employee at all. She works directly for Victor and I. Her voice cracked. Charlotte, I'm so sorry. The silence in the room was heavy. Charlotte looked at her desk, then at Priya. Priya was 26 years old. She had come to the firm straight out of design school with a portfolio, and exactly the kind of fierce, slightly overwhelmed ambition that Charlotte recognized because she'd had it herself. She had earned every increment of trust Charlotte had placed in her. She had been manipulated by a man who was professionally skilled at manipulating people. Sit down, Charlotte said. Priya sat. Were you contacted again after that first call? Once, the same woman, 2 days ago. I told her I couldn't continue the conversation, and I hung up. Good. Charlotte looked at her steadily. Priya, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything. Is there anything else you told her? Any detail, any schedule, any conversation you mentioned that you haven't told me just now? Priya thought. She asked about a coffee shop. I mentioned you'd asked me to look up the address of the Ridgeline Coffee on 7th for you. I didn't say why. Charlotte's jaw tightened. That was how Victor had known Ethan was near Gerald Foss. Not Ethan directly, the coffee shop location, the proximity, the inference. He'd moved fast on thin information, which meant he was running thin. Okay, Charlotte said. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write down every interaction you had with that woman. Every question she asked, every answer you gave, date and time. You're going to give that to Diane Reyes today. Priya nodded, pale and urgent. And then, Charlotte said, you're going to come to work tomorrow morning like normal, because you didn't do anything wrong. You were deceived by someone whose whole career has been built on deceiving people, and that's on him, not you. Priya stared at her. I thought you'd... What, fire you? I gave him information. He lied to get it from you. Those are two different events with two different responsible parties. Charlotte stood up. Write up the account. Get it to Diane. And Priya, thank you for telling me. Most people don't. Priya left. Charlotte stood at her window for exactly 90 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan. The leak was my office manager, she said when he picked up. Accidentally. Victor ran a social engineering play on her through a fake board contact. She didn't know. You believe her? Completely. Charlotte paused. Which means Victor didn't get what he thought he got. He got a coffee shop address and an inference. He doesn't know about Roy. He doesn't know about Marcus's findings. He moved up the meeting because he got nervous on incomplete information. Ethan was quiet for a moment on the other end. He bluffed, he said. He bluffed. And we called it, Ethan said. Something shifted in Charlotte's chest. Not relief exactly. More like the moment before relief when you can see it coming, but it hasn't arrived yet, and you're holding your breath. Tomorrow morning, she said. Tomorrow morning, he said. How are you doing? She almost said fine. It was her default. The word so practiced it came up automatically before she'd even checked whether it was true. I'm scared, she said instead. Yeah. Not about him, she said. Not really. I've been scared of Victor Lang for 18 months, and I'm done with that. I'm scared about... She stopped. I'm scared about what I want my life to look like after all of this is over, and whether I have the courage to want it honestly. A pause. You have more courage than almost anyone I've met, Ethan said. And I say that as someone who doesn't hand out statements like that. I know you don't, she said. That's why it means something. That evening, Ethan drove to his mother-in-law's house and sat at her kitchen table. The same table he'd sat at 100 times in the years since his wife died, in the years when she'd been his tether to the version of himself that was worth keeping, and told her everything. Her name was Ellen. She was 64, small, sharp, with the same clear eyes that Mia had inherited, and she had never once in 4 years told Ethan what to do with his grief or his life, which he considered one of the great kindnesses anyone had ever shown him. He told her about Charlotte. All of it. The fence, the joke, the coffee with 2 sugars, the kitchen table, the hand held in the quiet after dinner. Ellen listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're terrified," she said. "Yes." "Of losing someone again?" "Yes." She looked at her coffee cup. "Ethan, can I tell you something that I've wanted to tell you for about 2 years, but didn't, because you weren't ready to hear it?" He looked at her. "Loving Charlotte doesn't mean you loved Sarah less," she said. "It doesn't diminish what you had. It doesn't contradict it. Sarah was—" Her voice caught briefly and then steadied. "She was my daughter, and I miss her every single day. And I know because she told me that she spent the last year of her life worrying about you specifically. Not Mia. She knew Mia would be okay. She worried about you. Because she knew you were the kind of man who, when he loves someone, builds everything around them. And she was afraid that when she was gone, you'd stop building." Ethan didn't say anything. "She made me promise," Ellen said, "to tell you when it was time that she wanted you to keep building." The kitchen was very quiet. Ethan looked at the table. He had been holding something rigid for 4 years, some internal structure he'd constructed around his grief and his guilt and his certainty that moving forward would mean leaving something behind, and he felt it now at this table, in this particular quiet, beginning to give way. Not collapse, not break. Just soften the way a house settles after years, finding its real level. "She sounds like her mother," he said finally. Ellen smiled. "She was better than me. Don't tell her I said so." He laughed. A short, rough sound. The kind of laugh that lives right next to the other thing. He drove home and checked on Mia, who was asleep with her arm thrown over the edge of the bed, in the way she'd slept since she was an infant. And he stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at his daughter, and thought about the specific terror and privilege of being responsible for a person you love more than your own comfort. Then he went to bed. He slept. He was going to need it. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Charlotte's building seated 22 people, and on the morning of the shareholders' meeting, it held 19 of them, which meant the room was full in the particular way of rooms where tension has taken up physical space. Diane Reyes was at the far end with 2 associates. Charlotte sat across from the board table in her own chair, at her own company, in a room she had chosen and furnished and filled with light, because she understood that light changed how people thought. Victor walked in at 2 minutes to 9. He looked exactly the way Ethan had expected. Immaculate, composed, carrying the specific ease of someone who has already decided how this ends. He had 2 lawyers with him, a younger associate, and the particular expression of a man arriving for a ceremony he'd organized. He saw Charlotte first, then he saw Ethan. The ease did not leave his face, but something behind it shifted, recalculated. Ethan watched it happen in the half-second before Victor's expression smoothed over the calculation and became merely pleasant. "Charlotte," Victor said. "Thank you for hosting." "It's my building," Charlotte said. Victor smiled and sat down. Ethan stood near the wall. He was not at the table. He was not presenting. He was simply present in clothes that were his best, without trying to be something they weren't: clean jacket, no tie, the hands of a man who works with them. He did not look at Victor. He looked at the board members one by one, the way you assess a structure before you begin work. Reading weight distribution. Reading where the load was being carried. Marcus Hale on Victor's left glanced at Ethan and looked away. 1 vote uncertain. Diane Cho 2 seats down, met Ethan's eyes for a moment without expression. Unreadable. The other 5 board members looked like people who had come to a meeting and were beginning to suspect it was going to be a more interesting meeting than advertised. Board Chair Raymond Osei called the meeting to order. Victor stood to present. How was good? Ethan would give him that. He was smooth and prepared, and he built his case the way a skilled attorney builds a case, layer by layer, starting with things no one would contest and moving steadily toward the things he needed them to accept, so that by the time he got to the contentious parts, they felt like natural conclusions rather than arguments. He presented Charlotte's early financial decisions, selectively framing risk-taking as recklessness. He presented the client emails out of context, framing directness as instability. He was careful. He was clean. He never said anything provably false. Then he got to Ethan. "I want to be sensitive to the personal dimension here," Victor said with the expression of a man being extremely sensitive. "But the board has a fiduciary responsibility to evaluate all factors affecting the judgment of company leadership. And the pattern of behavior over recent months, the sudden relocation, the rapid formation of a personal relationship with a local service provider, the severing of established professional networks suggests a leadership posture that prioritizes personal comfort over professional stability." He looked at Ethan briefly. One look, then back to the board. The look said, "This is what I'm talking about. This man. In this room." Ethan breathed. He thought about what Diane Reyes had said on the phone. "Victor is professionally skilled at making people feel small in public." I thought about every room he'd ever stood in, every job site where the developer walked through and looked past him, every client meeting where his opinion wasn't solicited, every version of this moment where someone looked at his hands and made their calculation and moved on. He was still standing. He was always still standing. Raymond Osei looked at Charlotte. "Ms. Hayes, would you like to respond?" Charlotte stood. She was composed, and she was clear, and she was the version of herself that had built this company from a studio apartment and a second-hand laptop, and she said, "I'd like to introduce some information that I believe is directly relevant to the board's evaluation. I'd like to ask my attorney to present it." Victor's expression didn't change. Diane Reyes stood and placed a bound document in front of each board member. "What you have in front of you," Diane said, "is a forensic accounting report compiled by Marcus Reyes Fong, a certified forensic accountant, documenting a pattern of unauthorized fund transfers from a subsidiary account of Hayes Design Group. The transfers span 14 months. The total amount is $312,000. The account was restructured without board approval to include a secondary administrator." She paused. "That administrator is Victor Lang." The room was very quiet. Victor's composure held. Credit where it was due, it held completely. "This is a fabrication," he said. His voice was level. "This is exactly what I described. A reactive attempt to discredit a legitimate governance concern with manufactured allegations. The documents include original authorization signatures," Diane said. "They include corresponding bank records. They include time-stamped digital access logs." She paused. "They also include original contractor documents from a property transaction 18 months ago that Mr. Lang requested be destroyed." Victor looked at Diane. For the first time, something cracked. It was small. A tightening around the eyes. A micro-adjustment of posture. Nothing that most people in the room would have noticed. Ethan noticed. Raymond Osei was looking at the document in front of him with the careful, controlled expression of a man who has just seen something that requires him to entirely rethink the last 90 minutes. Marcus Hale was very still. Diane Cho was reading. Victor said, "I'd like to call a recess." "The presentation isn't concluded," Raymond said. "I'm requesting a recess," Victor said, "and I'm noting that request and proceeding." Raymond looked at Diane. "Please continue." Victor's attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. Victor listened. His jaw moved. Diane continued. She laid out the timeline. She laid out the account structure. She presented Roy Castillo's affidavit. Roy, who had kept those contracts in his truck for 18 months because something in him had known they would matter someday. She presented Ethan's sworn statement about the coffee shop conversation, the account number, the leverage window. And then she said, "I'd like to invite Mr. Walker to address the board directly." Victor looked at Ethan for the first time since that first moment, and Ethan walked to the front of the room. He did not have notes. He did not have a prepared statement. He had spent the previous evening not preparing remarks, but doing something he found more useful, which was thinking clearly about what was true and what mattered and how to say it in as few words as possible. "My name is Ethan Walker," he said. "I'm a home repair contractor. I've been doing this work for 16 years. I live next door to Charlotte Hayes. We're friends, and more than friends, and I'm not going to apologize for either of those things." He looked at the board members each in turn. "I'm here because 2 days before this meeting was moved up, I was in a coffee shop on 7th Street, and I heard Mr. Lang on the phone discussing account timing and a leverage window. I provided a sworn statement about what I heard. I'm available to repeat that under oath in any legal proceeding that follows." He paused. "I also want to say one thing that isn't in any document." The room was completely still. "Mr. Lang called me a distraction," Ethan said. "He described me to Charlotte's attorney as a local handyman she'd attached herself to. He assumed that because I work with my hands and I don't own a suit that impresses people, I wasn't watching." He looked at Victor directly for the first time. "I was watching. I've been watching my whole career. That's what people in my work do. We go into houses that look fine on the outside, and we find out what's actually going on in the structure. And what's actually going on in the structure of your relationship with this company." He looked back at the board. "It's in that document. Every number, every signature, every date." He stepped back. He sat down. Victor stood up. And then Victor did the thing that Charlotte had predicted, and Ethan had counted on, the thing that people with Victor's particular combination of intelligence and ego always do when the room turns against them. He got angry, not loudly, not in a way that looked like anger from the outside. But the precision left his voice, and something else came in. He said that the documents were fabricated. He said that Ethan Walker was a man with a financial interest in Charlotte's assets. He said that this was exactly the kind of compromised judgment he had described, that Charlotte had brought a handyman into a boardroom to lie on her behalf. He said the word handyman the way some people say it, with the specific contempt that assumes the word is a diminishment. Raymond Osei looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Lang," he said, "I've been chairing boards for 23 years, and in my experience, when a man responds to documented financial records by attacking the person who presented them rather than the records themselves." He paused. "That tells me more about the records than any counter-presentation could." Victor's attorney put a hand on his arm. Victor sat down. Diane Cho, who had been silent through everything, looked up from the document in front of her and said, "I'd like to call for an immediate suspension of Mr. Lang's board access pending independent verification of these records." Marcus Hale said seconded. Raymond looked around the table. The vote was not close. After, in the hallway outside the conference room, while Victor's attorneys surrounded him in a huddle that was visibly not going well. Charlotte stood with Ethan by the window at the end of the corridor, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Charlotte said, "He called the cops." "Who did?" "Roy. He called the police 6 months ago. Diane just told me. There's already an active financial investigation that our evidence just handed a major piece of." Ethan looked at her. "Victor's been under investigation," she said. "Before any of this, before I ended the engagement, the shareholders meeting, the attack on my reputation, it wasn't just about the money in my accounts." She stopped. "He needed to destroy my credibility before the investigation surfaced publicly. He needed me to look unstable, unreliable, compromised, so that anything I said would look like the behavior of someone who was already falling apart." Ethan was very quiet. "I was afraid of you," he said. "Not because you were a threat to his plan, because you were already going to be a witness." Charlotte looked at the wall. "He was going to bury me," she said, "before I could testify." The word hung between them. "He didn't," Ethan said. "No." She exhaled slowly. "He didn't." From down the hall they could hear Victor Lang's voice rising and his attorney's voice lowering, and the specific texture of a man discovering that the room has stopped being his. Charlotte turned away from it. She looked at Ethan. "You walked in there," she said. "You walked in there first," he said. "Every day for 18 months. She looked at him for a long moment, in the particular way she'd been looking at him for weeks. The look that went past everything on the surface and looked at the actual structure underneath. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said. You'd have figured it out, he said honestly. You'd have done it slower and harder and alone, but you'd have figured it out. You're the most capable person I know. That's not a compliment, she said. That's a fact. Yes, he said. But this is a compliment. You're also the bravest. Not because you're not scared. Because you're scared and you keep walking into rooms anyway. She looked at him. Something in her face did the thing. It sometimes did, in unguarded moments. The thing he had no word for, except real. Ethan, she said. I know, he said. I haven't said it. I know, he said again. Take your time. She almost smiled. Almost. Then, I'm done taking time. The hallway was bright and ordinary, and Victor Lang was 40 feet away, dismantling what was left of his professional credibility. And none of that mattered to either of them in this specific moment, which was its own kind of structure, its own kind of foundation. The hallway outside the conference room emptied slowly, the way spaces do after something significant has happened in them. People lingering, recalibrating, not quite ready to return to ordinary life. Victor's attorneys moved him toward the elevator with the focused efficiency of people managing a situation that had stopped being manageable. Raymond Osei stopped to shake Charlotte's hand and said 3 words, "Well done, Charlotte." And those 3 words, delivered by a man who chose them carefully, landed with the weight of everything they contained. Diane Reyes gathered her documents, told Charlotte she'd call within the hour, with next steps on the police investigation, and left with the brisk competence of someone who had more work to do and was already doing it in her head. And then the hallway was just Charlotte and Ethan. "Come on," Charlotte said. "I need air." They took the stairs. Not the elevator, not with Victor still in the building, not with the chance of 30 seconds in a small space with the man who had spent 18 months trying to dismantle her. The stairs, and then the lobby, and then outside into the Colorado morning, which was cold and bright, and completely indifferent to what had just happened on the 3rd floor. Charlotte walked half a block before she stopped. She put both hands on a low stone wall and leaned on it and breathed. Ethan stood beside her and said nothing, because he had learned by now that Charlotte Hayes processed things by moving through them, not around them, and what she needed in the immediate aftermath of something large was not commentary. It was presence. After a long moment, she said, "I built that company in 4 years. 40-hour weeks became 60-hour weeks, became the whole thing. I missed events. I missed relationships. I told myself it would be worth it when I had something solid, something real." She looked at the wall under her hands. "And then I let someone into it," she said. "Someone I thought was real. And he spent 14 months quietly taking it apart from the inside while I was standing right there." She paused. "How does a person miss that?" "Because you were busy building," Ethan said. "And he was counting on you being too busy to look." She was quiet. "You know the worst part," she said. "Not the money, not even the betrayal. The worst part is that I almost believed him. When he started making noise about my judgment about you, there was a part of me, a small part. I'm not proud of that. Wondered if he was right. If I was making bad decisions. If I was..." She stopped. "If I was too much of something and not enough of something else. The way I've wondered my whole life." Ethan turned to look at her. She was still looking at the wall. "Charlotte." She looked up. "He was counting on that too," Ethan said. "That's the whole mechanism. He needed you to doubt yourself because a woman who doubts herself doesn't look too carefully at the people around her. She's too busy managing her own insecurity." He held her gaze. He found the one wound and he pressed on it for 18 months. Her jaw tightened. "I know," she said. "And you didn't break," he said. She looked at him. "I almost did." "Almost doesn't count in structures," he said. "The beam either holds or it doesn't. Yours held." Something moved through her face fast, unguarded, the kind of emotion that arrives before the person can decide whether to allow it. She looked away. "Thank you," she said. "For today. For all of it." "Don't thank me." "Ethan." "I mean it. Don't thank me like I did you a favor. I was exactly where I wanted to be." He paused. "Where I'm going to keep wanting to be if you'll let me." The sentence hung in the cold air between them. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment, and he could see it. The calculation. The old instinct to manage expectations, to pre-protect herself from the disappointment that had always come before. He could see her reaching for it, and then he could see her put it down. "Okay," she said. Just that. "Okay." But the way she said it, steady, deliberate, like a person stepping onto ground they've tested and found solid, made it feel like more than a word. "Okay," he said back. They stood there for another moment in the cold, two people who had both been through the kind of fire that burns off everything that isn't essential, standing in what was left, which turned out to be enough. Then Charlotte's phone rang. She looked at it. "Diane." She answered. Ethan watched her face as she listened. Watched the controlled surprise move through it, and then something else. Something that looked like the end of a held breath. She hung up. "They picked him up," she said. "Victor." Police were waiting in the lobby. The financial investigation had been building a parallel case, and today's documents gave them what they needed for a formal arrest. Ethan was still. "It's done," Charlotte said. Her voice was quiet, a little disbelieving. "It's actually done." "Yes," he said. She looked at him, and then she laughed. A real laugh, sudden and uncontrolled, and nothing like the composed, managed sound she usually allowed herself. It lasted about 4 seconds, and then she pressed her hand over her mouth, and her eyes were bright. "Sorry," she said. "Don't apologize for that," he said. "It's just—" She shook her head. "I've been carrying this for 18 months, and now it's just—" She gestured at the air. "Done." "Some things are allowed to be done," he said. She looked at him. The brightness in her eyes was still there. "Let's go get Mia from school," she said. He stared at her. "She's not done until 3. "I know. Let's go anyway. I want to tell her." Charlotte was already moving. "She's going to have opinions about this." "She has opinions about everything. That's what I love about her," Charlotte said. And then she stopped walking, because she'd heard what she said, and she turned back to face him. He had heard it too. The word she'd used. She stood there, and she didn't retract it, and she didn't qualify it, and she didn't armor it in irony or frame it as a general observation. She just stood there and let it sit in the open air. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Me too." They got Mia from school at 2:45, which required Charlotte to charm the front office into releasing her 15 minutes early, which she accomplished with the specific warmth and confidence of someone who had just won a boardroom battle and was feeling for the first time in 18 months like herself again. Mia came out of the building with her backpack and her expression of careful, practiced coolness that she deployed when something surprised her and she didn't want it to show. She looked at Charlotte standing next to her father's truck. "Why are you here?" she said. "It's early." "Get in," Charlotte said. "I'll tell you." Mia got in. She looked between them as the truck pulled away from the school. Processing. Calculating. Her 8-year-old mind moving through the data. "Something happened," she said. "Something happened," Ethan confirmed. "The Victor thing. The Victor thing. And—" Charlotte turned in her seat to look at Mia directly. "It's over," she said. "He was arrested this morning. The company is safe. Everything I built is still mine." Mia absorbed this. "I knew it," she said. Charlotte blinked. "You knew it." "I knew he wasn't going to win." She said it with the serene certainty of a child who has done her calculations and trusts them. "Because he thought my dad wasn't important. And that's always the mistake." She looked at Ethan. "Right. That's the mistake," he agreed. "I told Jalen that," Mia said somewhat smugly. He didn't understand the reference. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He looked at the road. "She's not wrong," he said. They went to dinner that evening at a place Mia chose, which meant a diner with red vinyl seats and a pie case by the door, and a menu that had not changed since approximately 1987, and which Mia considered the highest form of restaurant. She ordered a patty melt. She ordered a chocolate milkshake. She asked for extra pickles with the seriousness of someone filing a legal document. They sat in a booth, Mia on one side, Charlotte and Ethan on the other, and the diner was warm and loud and smelled like coffee and griddle, and nobody in the room knew or cared that 2 hours earlier, something had ended and something else had begun. Mia ate, her patty melt, and periodically offered detailed analysis of everything she observed, including the probable emotional backstory of the couple 3 booths down, and the structural inadequacy of the pie case's lighting. Charlotte listened to all of it with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions, building on Mia's observations, treating them as the serious observations they were. Ethan watched. He watched Charlotte lean forward when Mia said something she found interesting, which was often. He watched Mia, who trusted very few people with her real thinking, offer it freely across the table. He watched the two of them find the particular rhythm that people find when they genuinely like each other. The back and forth, the finishing of each other's tangents, the shared language assembling itself in real time. He thought about his wife. He thought about Ellen's kitchen table and what had been said there. He thought about structures and foundations, and the difference between weight-bearing walls and decorative ones. He thought this is what it's supposed to look like. He didn't say any of that out loud. He ordered the apple pie and let the evening happen around him and held the warmth of it like something he was learning to deserve. 2 weeks passed. They were good weeks. Not uncomplicated. Charlotte had a company to stabilize legal proceedings, to participate in a staff meeting, to lead in which she told her team the truth about what had happened, and watch them respond with the kind of loyal, furious protectiveness that tells you what you've actually built. Priya cried. The senior designer, a quiet man named Tom, who had been with Charlotte since year 2, said simply, "Tell us what you need." Charlotte told them. They did it. Victor's legal situation deteriorated rapidly once the full scope of the financial investigation became public. There were other companies, other accounts, other people who had been waiting for someone else to go first. They went. The case against him expanded in the way that cases against people who have spent years believing they are untouchable always expand when the first stone shifts quickly, completely, with the slightly stunning finality of a structure that was never as sound as it appeared. Charlotte was interviewed by investigators 3 times. Each time she walked in with Diane Reyes beside her, and everything documented and nothing improvised, because she had learned that lesson thoroughly. Ethan fixed 2 kitchens and a bathroom floor, and a roof that had been slowly losing its argument with Colorado winters for the past 6 years. He got 3 new clients, 2 of whom had heard his name in connection with the Hayes case, and called because they wanted someone whose word was worth something. He took both jobs. He quoted fair prices. He did the work right. Mia had no further incidents with Jalen, who appeared to have adjusted his worldview accordingly. And every few evenings, in the natural rhythm that had assembled itself without either of them planning it, Ethan and Charlotte found themselves at one kitchen table or the other, with or without Mia, talking about the ordinary things and the non-ordinary things, and the growing category of things that sat between them as shared understanding rather than words. One evening, a Thursday, late October, the kind of cold that had arrived ahead of schedule and made the house feel particularly warm by contrast, Charlotte said something that stopped him. They were washing dishes, his kitchen. Mia asleep upstairs. The comfortable domestic machinery of an evening winding down. Charlotte said, "Do you ever think about the joke?" He looked at her. "Which one?" She gave him a look. "The joke. The husband for an hour." "Yes." She handed him a plate to dry. "I've been thinking about it. About what I actually meant when I said only." He dried the plate. "What did you mean?" he said. She was quiet for a moment, her hands in the water, looking at the window above the sink. "I think I meant that I was already afraid," she said. "That fast, before I knew anything real about you. Just the way you talked about that building I'd designed. The way you looked at me when I said something like what I said was actually the thing you were listening for." She paused. "Nobody had looked at me like that in a very long time, maybe ever. And I got scared, and the only way I knew how to handle scared was to make it small. Make it a joke. Make it just 1 hour, so that if it hurt later, I could tell myself it was never supposed to be more than that." The kitchen was very quiet. "Charlotte," he said. "I'm still scared," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not standing here telling you I've figured it out, and I'm ready, and everything is resolved. I'm standing here telling you I'm scared, and I want this anyway." She looked at him. Both things, at the same time. He set down the dish. He looked at her, really looked at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand completely before he touched them. "I've been scared since the morning I brought you coffee," he said. "Since before that, probably. Since you sat on your porch stairs and asked if the noise was going to be a regular thing." He paused. "I told myself all the reasonable things. That I wasn't ready. That it was too fast. That Mia needed stability, and I needed to be careful, and there were 100 logical reasons to keep this at a distance." "And," she said. "And then I'd come over," he said, "and you'd be at the table with Mia talking about color theory, or you'd hand me coffee in the morning without making anything of it, and every single reasonable argument I'd made to myself would just—" He shook his head. "Fall apart." She looked at him. "Poorly constructed arguments," she said. "The worst," he agreed. "No load-bearing capacity at all." She laughed. That real laugh, the one he'd been collecting since the first time he heard it. He reached out and took her hand. Not urgently, not dramatically, the same way he put tools down when he was done with them and picked up the next right thing. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Unless you tell me to. And even then I'd probably ask you to be specific about which direction." She squeezed his hand. "Stay," she said. "Already decided," he said. That was October. November arrived with the particular gift of a Colorado Sunday morning that asks nothing of you and offers everything. And Ethan woke up to the smell of coffee he hadn't made and came downstairs to find Charlotte at his kitchen counter with Mia beside her on a step stool. Both of them in the serious work of making pancakes that were by all evidence already a significant improvement on anything Ethan had ever managed. He stood in the doorway. Neither of them noticed him for a moment. Mia was explaining something, her hands moving her voice, carrying the focused authority she brought to all important subjects. Charlotte was listening and nodding, and adjusting the heat on the burner and adding blueberries to the batter in a quantity that Mia apparently approved of because she said yes more with genuine satisfaction. He had thought many times in the past months about what it meant to rebuild. Not replace, not erase. Rebuild, which is a different thing entirely. A thing that requires you to understand the original structure well enough to know what was worth keeping. He had kept everything worth keeping. He had built something new with what remained. This was what it looked like. "Dad's awake," Mia said without looking up from the batter. Charlotte turned. She had flour on her left sleeve, and she had clearly been awake longer than him, and she looked in the specific morning light of his kitchen, like someone who belonged here. "Sit down," she said. "You're not allowed to help." "It's my kitchen." "Debatable," Mia said. He sat down. He drank the coffee. Charlotte had made 2 sugars in his now, because she'd started making it that way without either of them remarking on it. And he watched the 2 most important people in his life make pancakes in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, and he let himself want it. Not guardedly. Not with one hand on the exit. All the way. The thing that happened at the fence 3 weeks later was not planned. Ethan had been doing maintenance on the shared fence, the same fence he'd first repaired the week Charlotte moved, in the same fence where all of this had started, and Charlotte had come outside with 2 coffees and sat on her porch steps, and they had talked for a while about ordinary things, and then there was a comfortable quiet, the kind that only exists between people who have earned it, and Ethan, who measured twice and cut once and never spoke before he knew what he meant to say, put down his tools and turned to face her. He had not rehearsed this. He had thought about it the way he thought about a difficult repair from the foundation, what it was actually built on, what it was actually for. And what it was built on was simple. What it was for was simple. He said her name. She looked up. "I know the timing is, I know it hasn't been that long," he said. "And I know you're in the middle of 100 things, and you just got through something that would have broken most people, and this is probably the wrong moment by any reasonable standard." She set down her coffee. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to have everything figured out," he said. "I'm not asking you to be ready or certain or to have stopped being scared. I'm asking you because I'm tired of treating the most obvious thing in my life like a question I'm still deciding the answer to." She stood up. She stepped off the porch. She came and stood in front of him by the fence at the place where their story had started, and she looked at him with those warm brown eyes, and she waited. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. Not a box. Not a ring store purchase made under pressure. A ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Plain gold quiet. The kind of thing made to last that Ellen had pressed into his hand 2 weeks ago, over her kitchen table, and said simply, she would have wanted this used. I love you, he said. I love you in the specific particular way that I have loved very few things in my life completely, and without reservation, and with full knowledge of what it costs. He paused. And I want to keep building something with you. Not the same thing I built before. Something new. Something that belongs to both of us, and to Mia, and to whatever comes next. Charlotte looked at the ring. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. You know I'm going to say yes, she said. I was hoping. I said yes 3 months ago, she said. In my head. I've been waiting for you to catch up. He laughed. The kind of laugh that lives right next to the other thing, the full and warm and real thing. You could have mentioned it, he said. You needed to get there yourself, she said. That's how you work. You measure twice. And then cut once. And then you're absolutely certain. She held out her hand. So cut. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it. Then she looked at him, and what was in her face was not the managed, composed, carefully controlled expression that Charlotte Hayes had learned to wear in the world. It was the real one. The open one. The one that had been under everything all along, waiting for someone willing to look past the surface to find it. Only an hour, he said. She laughed loud and real there by the fence in the cold morning air. Not even close, she said. He pulled her in. She held on. And 3 weeks later, Mia stood by the same fence with her arms crossed and the expression of someone evaluating a completed project, and she said, I knew this was going to happen. Did you? Charlotte said. From the color wheel conversation. Mia looked at them both with the calm certainty of a child who has done her calculations and found them correct. People who argue about yellow that passionately don't stay neighbors. Ethan looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at Ethan. She's not wrong, Charlotte said. She never is, he said. Mia looked satisfied. Can we get pancakes? She said. They got pancakes. And the joke that had started with a broken fence and a throwaway line about a borrowed husband. The joke that had carried more truth than either of them was ready to admit, that had opened a door neither of them had planned on opening, that had been less a joke than a question disguised as lightness. The way important questions often are, that joke became the story they told for the rest of their lives. Not as comedy, as proof. Proof that the most real things often arrive quietly through a side door, dressed like something ordinary, asking only that you be brave enough to let them stay. Ethan Walker had spent 4 years believing his best days were behind him. Charlotte Hayes had spent her whole life believing she was too much of the wrong things and not enough of the right ones. They were both wrong, and they were both finally exactly where they were supposed to be. Not because fate arranged it, not because it was easy, but because two people scared and imperfect and fully alive chose each other clearly, deliberately, and without reservation. That is the only kind of love worth building a life on. And they built